Monday morning arrived dressed in ordinary clothes. The sun rose as it always had, spilling soft gold across rooftops and washing the city awake. Vendors arranged fruit beneath colorful umbrellas. Buses sighed to a stop before filling with commuters. Office towers caught the morning light, their glass facades reflecting a world that appeared calm, predictable, unchanged. To everyone else, it was another week. To Amanya, it felt like standing at the edge of a bridge she had never noticed before. Crossing it would not require a dramatic leap. Only one step, one impossibly small step. She stood before her wardrobe longer than usual. Rows of carefully chosen blouses hung neatly beside tailored jackets in shades of navy, charcoal, and cream. Professional, appropriate, forgettable. Her hand drifted toward the familiar gray blazer she wore almost every Monday. Then she stopped. At the back of the wardrobe hung another jacket, deep emerald green. She had bought it nearly a year ago after admiring it in a shop window, the color of the hills after rain, rich, alive, impossible to overlook. She had worn it only once. Someone at work had laughed lightly. "That's bold for you." The comment hadn't been cruel. It had probably even been meant as a compliment. Yet the jacket had quietly disappeared into the back of the wardrobe ever since. Amanya smiled faintly and lifted it from the hanger. The fabric felt smooth beneath her fingertips. Today, she thought, today it deserves sunlight. When she entered the office, nothing extraordinary happened. No one gasped. No music swelled. The world did not pause because she had chosen a different jacket. Grace at reception looked up and smiled. "Morning, Amanya." "Good morning." Grace tilted her head. "I like that color on you." "Thank you." The words escaped before Amanya could replace them with her usual response. She didn't say, "Oh, it's an old jacket." She didn't laugh it off. She simply accepted the compliment. It felt strangely uncomfortable and strangely freeing. Throughout the morning, she noticed something unexpected. Changing one small habit made her aware of dozens of others. When someone interrupted her during a project discussion, she didn't immediately fall silent. She waited. The other person finished speaking. Then she calmly returned to her point. "As I was saying," the sentence surprised even her. No one objected. No one looked offended. They simply listened. Had it always been that easy? Or had she simply never let herself continue? Later that morning, Daniel stopped by her desk. "I've been meaning to ask, do you have the client retention reports from last quarter?" "I do." She opened the file and handed it over. He scanned a few pages. "You always organize these better than anyone." "Thank you." Again, just thank you. No explanation, no shrinking. Daniel smiled and walked away without another word. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet it lingered with her. Perhaps people had never expected her to minimize herself. Perhaps she had simply trained them to expect it. That afternoon, another strategy meeting filled the conference room. The familiar table, the same panoramic windows overlooking the city, the same polished wood, the same mugs of coffee releasing thin spirals of steam. Amanya sat halfway down the table. Then she remembered something from the leadership workshop. Sit where you intend to contribute. She quietly gathered her notebook and moved 3 seats closer to the front. A tiny movement, barely noticeable, yet her heartbeat quickened as though she'd announced herself to the entire company. No one commented. No one seemed to care. She almost laughed. How many prisons, she wondered, had existed only inside her own mind? The meeting began. Reports, budgets, timelines. Then the department manager looked around the room. "Our newest client has requested a different engagement strategy. Any thoughts?" Silence. The familiar silence. She recognized it immediately. This was usually the moment she waited for someone else to speak. Her pulse quickened. Her palms warmed. The old voice returned. "Wait. Someone smarter will answer. Don't risk sounding foolish." Another voice answered, quieter but steadier. "Or you could speak." The room stayed silent. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Amanya inhaled. "I have a suggestion." The words were calm, not loud, not theatrical, simply clear. Heads turned toward her. She explained her idea carefully, outlining each step, anticipating potential challenges. proposing practical solutions. No one interrupted. When she finished, the room stayed quiet a moment longer. Then the manager nodded. I like that. A colleague added, that could actually solve the onboarding issue. Someone else leaned forward. Could we expand that into a full proposal? The discussion continued. People built on her idea, asked questions, added improvements. No one dismissed her. No one laughed. The ceiling did not collapse. The world kept turning. Yet inside Amanya, something subtle shifted. For years, she had imagined visibility as a dangerous cliff. Instead, it felt more like opening a window. After the meeting, several colleagues stopped her in the corridor. Good contribution. Nice thinking. I hadn't considered that angle. Each compliment felt unfamiliar. She accepted them awkwardly but honestly. Thank you. The words grew slightly easier each time. That evening, doubt returned. Growth, she was beginning to learn, rarely moved in a straight line. She replayed every sentence she'd spoken during the meeting. Did she sound too confident? Had she interrupted anyone? Had she spoken for too long? By the time she reached home, the excitement had faded into anxiety. She laughed softly at herself. Even success, it seemed, could become another reason for self-criticism. Tuesday brought another test. An email arrived requesting volunteers to present quarterly findings before senior leadership. Usually, these presentations attracted enthusiastic hands. This time, surprisingly, the room stayed quiet. The deadline was close. The report was complex. Someone eventually looked toward Amanya. You understand the data better than anyone. Her heart skipped. The familiar response rose automatically. Maybe Daniel should, She caught herself. Why? Why was her first instinct always to disappear? She looked around the room. I can present it. The sentence landed softly. No fanfare. No applause. Just agreement. Perfect. Meeting over. Decision made. She stared after her colleagues as they left. Had it really been that simple? The presentation consumed the next 2 days. She prepared carefully, not because she feared failure, but because preparation was one way she honored responsibility. She refined every slide, removed unnecessary words, practiced transitions, timed herself, again, again, again. By Thursday morning, she knew the material so thoroughly she could explain it without looking at the screen. Yet confidence still refused to arrive. The boardroom felt colder than the rest of the building. Senior executives sat around an oval table, reviewing documents while waiting for the presentation to begin. Amanya connected her laptop. Her fingers trembled slightly. The first slide appeared, and for one terrifying second, every face seemed impossibly important. The old fear whispered again, "You don't belong here." She remembered the stars she had watched outside her apartment. None apologized for shining. She drew one slow breath. Then she began. The first minute felt mechanical. The second became easier. By the fifth, she forgot to be afraid. She answered questions thoughtfully. She admitted when additional analysis was still needed. She spoke with the quiet authority that comes from genuine understanding rather than performance. When the presentation ended, the operations director smiled. Excellent work, Amanya. The room echoed with nods of agreement. As people gathered their papers, one executive paused beside her. I've noticed your work for years, he said. You have? He looked mildly surprised. Of course. Then he walked away. She stood frozen. For years, he had noticed. She had spent so much energy believing she was invisible that she had never considered another possibility. Perhaps she had been seen all along. Perhaps the person overlooking her most consistently had been herself. Friday afternoon brought a moment she hadn't anticipated. She was making tea in the staff kitchen when two colleagues entered, unaware she was around the corner. One voice laughed lightly. Have you noticed Amanya lately? Another answered. She's different. A pause, then came the sentence that settled heavily in the room. She's becoming intimidating. Silence followed. Neither voice sounded angry, only puzzled. The first speaker replied, I preferred how she used to be. Their footsteps faded down the corridor. Amanya remained standing beside the kettle, steam rising quietly between her and the empty wall. Intimidating. The word echoed inside her. Not confident, not capable, not growing. Intimidating. She carried the mug back to her office, but the tea went untouched. By evening, the comment had grown larger than it deserved. Had she changed too much? Was she becoming arrogant? Had visibility made her less kind? The questions multiplied with frightening speed. When she arrived home, she removed the emerald jacket and hung it carefully in the wardrobe. Her hand lingered on the fabric. For a long moment, she considered returning it to the back, to safety, to invisibility, to the version of herself everyone found comfortable. She closed the wardrobe and sat beside the window. Outside, twilight settled gently over the city. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. A church bell rang. The familiar sounds of evening wrapped around her. Her thoughts drifted to the little girl beneath the jacaranda tree, the teenager who stopped volunteering after being mocked, the university student who apologized for excelling, the young professional who let others present her ideas. One realization arrived with startling clarity. Every time she had become smaller, someone else had become more comfortable, but she had become less herself. She leaned back and closed her eyes. Then another thought followed. The room hadn't become uncomfortable because she had changed. The room had become uncomfortable because it had grown accustomed to her shrinking. There was a difference, a profound one. People often mistake familiarity for goodness. They resist change not because the change is wrong, but because it asks them to adjust. If she returned to silence now, she would not be choosing humility. She would be choosing fear. The realization settled over her like the first light before sunrise. Quiet, steady, irreversible. She rose from the chair and walked to her desk. The leadership application still waited inside her laptop. 9 pages. Several questions. One blank section asking why she believed she was suited for the role. For weeks, that question had felt impossible. Tonight, she rested her fingers on the keyboard. She did not type immediately. Instead, she smiled. Not because she suddenly believed she had all the answers, but because, for the first time in years, she had stopped asking permission to exist. And somewhere beyond the fear, beyond the old voices, beyond the lifelong habit of becoming smaller, another version of Amanya was beginning to emerge. Not louder, not harder, simply unwilling to disappear again. The cursor blinked at the top of the empty page like a heartbeat, neither urging nor accusing, simply reminding Amanya that the next move belonged to her. She read the question again. Why do you believe you are suited for this leadership position? Only one sentence. Yet it carried the weight of an entire lifetime. For years, she had been fluent in describing what others did well. She could praise colleagues with precision, spot strengths in students, encourage friends through uncertainty, celebrate achievements without hesitation. Describing her own strengths, though, felt like speaking a language she had never learned. Her fingers rested lightly on the keyboard, and the familiar voice returned. Don't exaggerate. Don't sound proud. Someone else deserves this more. She closed her eyes. Those words were familiar, too familiar, and she realized something remarkable. The voice had never changed. Only now had she begun questioning whether it deserved to be believed. She opened her eyes and typed the first sentence. I am suited for this role because I have consistently demonstrated leadership before holding the title. She stopped. Read it again. It was true, not inflated, not boastful. True. She kept writing about mentoring junior staff without being asked, about clients who requested to work with her because she listened before solving problems, about leading projects quietly when deadlines grew difficult, about building trust rather than demanding authority. She didn't decorate her accomplishments. She simply let them exist. When she reached the final paragraph, she wrote the words that surprised her most. Leadership, to me, is not about being the loudest voice in the room. It is about creating a room where every voice has the confidence to contribute. She leaned back. A slow smile spread across her face. For the first time, she had described herself without apologizing. The application stayed open overnight, not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted to read it once more with fresh eyes. The next morning, sunlight spilled across her dining table, warming the pages she'd printed for review. She read each sentence carefully, searching for exaggeration. She found none. Searching for unnecessary modesty, she found some still lingering and crossed it out line by line. I have been fortunate enough. I only tried to help. Perhaps my experience. She replaced each one with clearer language. I have. I led. I developed. The edits were small, but they transformed the document. It no longer sounded like someone asking permission. It sounded like someone presenting evidence. She signed her name, Amanya, and watched the ink dry, staring at it for a long moment before she submitted the application. There was no dramatic music, no fireworks, only the soft whoosh of an email leaving her outbox. Yet the sound felt strangely significant. A door had closed behind her. Another had quietly opened. The waiting began, and it turned out that courage was not a single decision, but a series of smaller ones made while uncertainty lingered. Each morning, Amanya resisted the urge to check her email every few minutes. Each afternoon, she reminded herself that submitting the application had already been an act of victory, that whether she received the position no longer defined her worth, or at least that was what she kept telling herself. Some days she believed it completely, other days she didn't. Growth, she was discovering, was rarely linear. 3 days later, the invitation arrived. Interview scheduled. Friday, 10 a.m. She read the email twice before letting herself smile. Then unexpectedly she laughed, not because she was fearless, but because she remembered the woman who, only weeks earlier, had deleted the application before writing the first sentence. That woman would never have received this email. Preparation became her companion. Evenings were spent reviewing leadership principles, revisiting past projects, reflecting on difficult situations she'd successfully navigated. She wrote notes, not scripts. She no longer wanted to memorize perfect answers. She wanted to speak honestly. One question lingered more than the others. Describe your leadership style. She considered the confident leaders she admired. Some were charismatic, others commanded rooms effortlessly. A few spoke with remarkable authority. She possessed none of those qualities in abundance, at least not in the obvious way. One evening, while watering the peace lily by her window, the answer arrived quietly. She smiled. My leadership style, she whispered into the empty apartment, is to help people become larger, not smaller. The words settled naturally. They felt like home. Friday morning arrived wrapped in cool air after a night of rain. The streets glistened beneath the early sun, leaves shimmering with droplets that caught the light like scattered crystals. Amanya stood before the mirror, fastening the buttons of her emerald jacket. This time she wore it without hesitation. Not because it made her look confident, but because she liked it. That realization made her smile. For years she had dressed according to how little attention she might attract. Today she dressed according to what felt authentic. There was a difference, a quiet but meaningful one. The interview room was smaller than she'd imagined. 3 interviewers sat behind a polished wooden table, each greeting her warmly. No one looked intimidating. They looked interested, and the distinction mattered. The chair felt firm beneath her as she sat and folded her hands loosely in her lap. One interviewer smiled. Tell us about yourself. The old version of Amanya would have listed qualifications mechanically before rushing to the next question. Instead, she paused, not from fear, but from intention. My name is Amanya, she began. I enjoy solving problems that help people work more effectively together. The sentence surprised even her. It wasn't a job title. It wasn't a degree. It was purpose. The interview unfolded gently, questions flowing into conversation. She spoke about projects that had failed and what they'd taught her. She described mentoring junior colleagues. She admitted mistakes without defensiveness. When she didn't know the answer to one technical question, she said so honestly before explaining how she would find it. No embarrassment, no performance, only truth. Midway through, the chairperson leaned forward. What makes you believe you can lead people who are older or more experienced than you? The room went still. This question once would have terrified her. She breathed slowly, then answered. I don't believe leadership depends on knowing more than everyone else. She paused. I believe people willingly follow leaders who make them feel respected, heard, and capable. Another brief silence. I've spent years doing that without the title. The interviewers exchanged quick glances, not skeptical ones, thoughtful ones. The chairperson smiled almost imperceptibly. Thank you. Walking out of the room, Amanya expected to feel exhausted. Instead, she felt remarkably light, not because she was certain she'd be selected, but because she had finally met herself. The version of herself that had existed before years of caution buried her in layers of hesitation. She hadn't become someone new. She had returned to someone familiar, someone she had simply forgotten. The following week moved slowly. Normal work resumed. Meetings, emails, client calls, deadlines. Life rarely paused to celebrate internal victories. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, everything had. People began seeking her opinion more frequently, not because she suddenly possessed greater knowledge, but because she had stopped hiding the knowledge she already possessed. One afternoon, a junior colleague named Sarah knocked gently on her office door. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course." Sarah stepped inside, clutching a notebook against her chest. "I've been asked to present next week." She hesitated. "I'm thinking of asking someone else to do it." Amanya recognized the look immediately. She had worn it herself for years. "What are you afraid of?" she asked softly. Sarah looked down. "That I'll say something wrong." Amanya smiled gently. "And if you don't present?" Sarah frowned. "Someone else will." "And if they present your ideas?" A slow understanding crossed Sarah's face. "They'll receive the credit." Amanya nodded. Neither woman spoke for several moments. Finally, Sarah smiled. "I suppose I should present." "I think you should." After Sarah left, Amanya remained seated, staring thoughtfully through the window. How many conversations like this had she needed years ago? How many lives quietly changed because one person chose encouragement instead of limitation? Perhaps confidence spread that way, not loudly, one person at a time. Late Friday afternoon, an email appeared. Leadership appointment announcement, Monday morning. Her heartbeat slowed rather than quickened, and she was surprised by her own reaction. Weeks earlier, she would have spent the entire weekend consumed by anticipation. Now something inside her had settled. She cared deeply about the outcome, but she no longer believed the outcome would define her. That realization felt larger than any promotion. She left the office early and walked instead of taking a taxi. The city glowed beneath the golden light of late afternoon. Children skipped ropes outside their homes. Street musicians filled the air with gentle melodies. The scent of charcoal and roasting maize drifted through narrow streets. Everything seemed vividly alive. She noticed details she had overlooked for years. A tailor laughing with a customer, an elderly couple sharing roasted peanuts on a park bench, purple bougainvillea spilling over a stone wall. The world had always contained this beauty. She had simply spent too much time looking inward, measuring herself against invisible fears to notice it. When she reached home, she stood on the balcony watching the sunset dissolve into shades of amber and violet. A cool breeze lifted a strand of hair across her face. She closed her eyes. The silence no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like peace. Whatever happened on Monday, she understood something that no interview panel could grant or withhold. She had stopped asking the world whether she deserved to occupy space. She had decided that she did. And once that decision had been made, there was no returning to the woman who believed shrinking was the price of belonging. The weekend stretched before her like the quiet pause before dawn. Somewhere beyond it, Monday waited, not merely with an announcement, but with the final test of whether her confidence had become rooted deeply enough to survive either triumph or disappointment. Monday arrived with the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. The office felt unusually quiet. Conversations were shorter. Laughter came in brief bursts before dissolving into nervous glances at computer screens. Even the hum of printers and keyboards seemed subdued, as though the building itself understood that something important was about to happen. Amanya noticed it all, but unlike the woman she had been only weeks earlier, she was not measuring her worth against what the next few minutes might bring. She carried her tea to her desk, opened her planner, reviewed the day's schedule. The leadership announcement sat at the top of the page. Nothing more. No underlining, no exclamation mark, just another appointment in a life that had finally begun to belong to her again. Her email chimed. All staff are requested to gather in the conference room at 10 a.m. She closed the message gently, then kept working. By 10 o'clock, every chair in the conference room was occupied. People stood along the walls where seats had run out. Soft conversation floated through the room before fading as the department director entered. He smiled warmly. For a few moments he spoke about the organization's growth, its future, and the importance of leadership that served people rather than titles. Then he unfolded a single sheet of paper. "I am pleased," he began, "to announce our new team lead." The room went still. Amanya felt her heartbeat, but it no longer frightened her. Whatever happened next, she had already crossed the bridge she once believed impossible. The director looked up. "Please join me in congratulating," he smiled, "Amanya." For a heartbeat, the room disappeared. She heard the applause before she understood it. Faces turned toward her, some smiling broadly, others surprised. Daniel was among the first to clap. Sarah's smile stretched ear to ear. Someone behind her whispered, "I knew it." Amanya rose slowly, not because she doubted herself, because gratitude had momentarily stolen her breath. She walked to the front of the room, each step strangely familiar. Years ago, she would have wondered whether she belonged there. Now she understood that belonging was never something another person could hand her. It was something she had finally stopped taking away from herself. The director shook her hand. "You earned this." Only 4 words, but they reached places inside her that years of self-doubt had once occupied. The weeks that followed were filled with ordinary work. Leadership, she quickly discovered, looked nothing like the dramatic scenes in books and films. It was answering difficult emails with kindness, making unpopular decisions with fairness, listening before speaking, admitting mistakes, protecting people rather than protecting pride. She did not become louder. She did not suddenly command every room. She remained thoughtful, observant, gentle. The difference was that she no longer mistook gentleness for weakness. She no longer apologized for existing. Several months later, Human Resources invited her to speak during the company's mentorship program for newly recruited employees. The request made her smile. Years earlier, the thought of speaking before a room full of strangers would have filled her with dread. Now it felt like a chance to offer someone else what she had once desperately needed. She accepted. The training room overlooked a garden where yellowbirds hopped between flowering shrubs. Morning light poured through wide windows, warming rows of neatly arranged chairs. Nearly 30 new employees sat waiting, notebooks open, expressions ranging from eager to anxious. Amanya recognized those faces, not because she had met them before, but because she had once worn every one of them herself. She stepped to the front. No elaborate introduction, no polished performance, just a quiet smile. "Good morning." The room answered softly. "I'd like to begin with a question." She paused. "How many of you have ever had an idea you never shared because you were afraid it wasn't good enough?" Almost every hand rose, some hesitant, some immediate. She nodded gently. "I know that feeling." The room relaxed, not because she had offered advice, because she had offered honesty. Instead of leadership theory, she told stories. She spoke about staying silent in meetings while others voiced ideas she had already imagined. She described deleting her own leadership application before writing the first sentence. She laughed softly, confessing how hard it once was simply to accept a compliment without explaining it away. People smiled. Some laughed with recognition. Others lowered their eyes, quietly seeing themselves in her. Then she asked another question. "Who taught you to become smaller?" Silence settled over the room, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. One young man spoke first. "My older brother always told me I talked too much." A woman near the window smiled sadly. "My teachers said I asked too many questions." Another voice added, "I was told confident women scare people." The stories kept coming. Different lives, different backgrounds, the same invisible lesson. Shrink, apologize, do not outshine, do not inconvenience, do not occupy too much space. Amanya listened without interrupting. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Fear always feels personal until you discover how many people are carrying the same weight. Months became years. The mentorship sessions continued. Some participants returned simply to share what had changed. Sarah became one of the company's most respected project managers. The young man who once feared speaking eventually led client presentations across the region. A quiet graduate who used to sit in the back row started an employee innovation forum that reshaped several company processes. None of them became different people. They simply stopped hiding the people they already were. Watching them grow became one of Amanya's greatest joys. Success no longer felt like climbing higher. It felt like reaching back. One rainy afternoon, while organizing old files, she found the faded blue notebook from her childhood. "Things I want to be." She smiled. The paper had grown fragile, the ink faded, yet the dreams remained remarkably clear. A leader, a teacher, a person who helps people. She laughed quietly. Not because every dream had come true exactly as imagined, but because she finally understood something the little girl who wrote those words could never have known. The greatest dream had never been becoming a leader. It had been becoming herself. Several years later, Amanya was invited to deliver the keynote address at a national leadership conference. Hundreds of educators, entrepreneurs, civil servants, students, and professionals filled a large auditorium. Backstage buzzed with quiet activity, technicians adjusting microphones, organizers checking schedules, speakers reviewing notes one last time. Amanya stood near the curtain holding a single folded page. Not a speech, only a few reminders. She had learned that the most important words could never be memorized. They had to be lived first. The announcer called her name. Applause rose through the auditorium. She stepped into the light. For a brief moment, she remembered another stage. A classroom, a 9-year-old girl telling stories beneath fluorescent lights. She smiled. This time, she would not forget the applause. She walked to the center of the stage. The audience settled into silence. Thousands of eyes looked toward her. Years ago, she would have mistaken those eyes for judgment. Now she saw something else. Possibility. She began. "When I was younger, I believed confidence belonged to certain kinds of people." The room listened. "I thought it belonged to those who spoke loudly." She smiled. "I was wrong." She spoke about fear, about shrinking, about confusing humility with invisibility, about the exhausting habit of editing yourself before anyone else has the chance to hear you. People leaned forward. Some nodded quietly. Others wiped away tears they hadn't expected. Then she reached the words that had lived inside her for years. She looked slowly across the audience before speaking. "Some people think confidence is learning to become bigger." She paused. "I think confidence is remembering how big you were before fear asked you to shrink." Silence. Not empty. Sacred. The kind that arrives when truth recognizes itself in many hearts at once. She continued. "You were never born apologizing for your gifts. You learned it. You were never born believing your voice mattered less than someone else's. You learned it. You were never created to disappear so that other people could feel comfortable." She let the words settle. "And if those beliefs were learned," a gentle smile crossed her face, "they can also be unlearned." The applause began softly, then spread, not as celebration, but as recognition. People were not applauding her. They were applauding the possibility that they too had permission to become fully themselves. The conference ended late that evening. As attendees filtered toward the exits, many stopped to thank her. Some shared stories. Others simply smiled through tears. One young woman lingered near the back of the room, then approached hesitantly. "I almost didn't come today," she admitted. "I've spent years believing I wasn't leadership material." Amanya recognized the sentence immediately. She had spoken it herself once. "What changed?" she asked gently. The young woman smiled. "I realized I wasn't afraid of leading." She paused. "I was afraid of being seen." Amanya's eyes softened. She nodded. "So was I." Nothing more needed to be said. The young woman walked away carrying something no one could see. Not certainty, not perfection, just the first quiet spark of courage. It was enough. It always had been. That night, Amanya stood on the balcony of her apartment, watching the city shimmer beneath a sky full of stars. Years earlier, she had stood in the same place wondering when she had become afraid of being seen. Tonight, she understood the answer. She had never truly lost herself. She had simply buried herself beneath years of other people's expectations. The wind moved gently through the trees below. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. A church bell rang. Life continued with its familiar rhythm. She smiled toward the horizon. The spaces she occupied had not changed very much. The office, the conference room, the stage, the city. What had changed was the woman who walked into them. She no longer entered asking, "Do I belong here?" She entered asking, "How can I help others know that they belong too?" Because that, she had discovered, was the quietest and perhaps the greatest form of leadership. Not standing above people, but standing beside them until they remembered the size of the life they were always meant to live. And so, if there was one truth her journey had taught her, it was this. You were never meant to fit into the spaces you occupy by becoming less. You were meant to transform those spaces by bringing your whole self into them. Not louder, not greater than anyone else, not seeking permission, simply, courageously, fully you.